into D&D. So everybody, welcome to A Romantic Dinner with the DM, the podcast where we sit down and talk with the DM about DM stuff in D&D.
Mm-hmm. And DM things.
And today we're joined by AsterixtheSwift.
The swiftest
Hello.
DM.
Do you usually do you leave the Swift off nowadays most of the time?
Yeah, I mean, it still is my formal, I guess, IGN or name that I use everywhere. So if people use it, that's fine. But quickly, almost everyone figures out that they just stick with Asterix.
Yeah, it's either that or Mr. the Swift, which is pretty good.
I've not heard that much, to be honest.
Oh, well, hopefully this popularizes it.
Agreed.
That'd be ideal. All right. So, full-on disclaimer, folks. This is a re-record. A re-record of the first podcast episode, you say? Well, I say to you, what do you do when you record like 8 hours of game footage a day? You know, sometimes you lose stuff.
Sometimes you lose things. Sometimes I lose things in this particular instance. So, yeah. But you know what, y'all? Everyone listening, you are going to have an even better time because time has passed. Campaigns have grown. Characters have learned. Humans have become more aware. And this is going to be even better than the previous one.
Absolutely, because when we recorded our first podcast with AsterixtheSwift, The Lost Files, we were on, what was it? We were on
You want to know what session number it would have been?
Yeah, what session number was that?
Well, I think what had just happened was...
Asterix is also our DM, in case we forgot to mention that.
It had just come after session 7,
Ooh,
I believe,
and we're
which
in
was
double digits
ironically, and I just realized this. I'm going through my notes. Let's see, the 24th. Yes, so it would have been April 10th was the last session. That is also the one and only session that I did not record.
Beautiful.
Oh, look at that, y'all. Full circle. So, session 7 was back in the day. We are now
just finished
on session
15.
Yeah, 15. So, this is going to be an excellent time to hop in. And as Arcad mentioned, this is a very, very special episode because it's not even just dinner with the DM. It's dinner with our DM.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just our DM, our friend, this is just everything we want out of a guest, which is why you're on number 1
and 2.
and 2.
Let's
1 and 1.5.
Let's be real,
Forgotten
audience.
files.
They lost the recording.
They did. We did. Shit.
We did.
Quotations.
oh, I see.
You because we just wanted you back. Yeah, wow.
Mhm.
It's true. It's actually what's going to happen is these files may go wandering off into the night, and then we'll just always be recording with Asterix. We might not ever release any podcasts ever. We'll just constantly record with Asterix every week or so. Just be like, hey, you want to talk about stuff again?
You know what's really funny, though? I was actually kind of thinking that we'd do something like that when Asterix was like, oh, yeah, I could talk about world building. I was like, well, what if every other week's a romantic dinner with the DM? And what if every other week is Asterix talking game theory?
Oh, my
Yeah,
goodness.
I mean, yeah, if you guys want to do more of a deep dive into both my thoughts and our campaign on some stuff, like get like into specific topics, I can talk about D&D for a while.
I love that. I worry that our trying to avoid spoilers would make it challenging, but I imagine you've thought that through.
Yeah, and I mean, realistically, if it's something ever so often, that's more and more stuff that gets revealed, then I can go back on, right?
That's true.
Because think, just in this one, the amount of stuff that you guys have learned since then. The last time we recorded this, you guys just left Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy. Now we're on our way back.
We are.
You guys actually just arrived.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, we did.
You
Wow.
got there right at the end, and think of all the stuff that has happened since then.
That seemed like a quick boat ride.
It did.
That's nice.
50 miles in a day is about only a 100-mile river.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
fair enough. Fair enough.
Better than a walk.
Yeah, I think. Well, let us know, listeners, if you want some game theory with Asterix. And I think the nice thing is because Asterix is one of our best friends, he also knows that we literally have minds. Like, I feel like a sieve is generous. Like, those like things that they use to make big bubbles, the big bubble blowers, just the big open paddles.
A hole.
Yeah, that's kind of our memory sometimes.
Yeah, we've been known to forget things from time to time, allegedly.
Yeah.
So
allegedly, nothing can be confirmed.
No, exactly, because we can't remember it.
Exactly.
But so let's go in with the first and the most classic question of them all. What made you want to DM a campaign? Like becoming a DM, what was like the thing that kind of just like led you into it? Made you want to really do it?
Well, at that point, roughly when I would have started my journey as a DM, I had already been a player for roughly 2 years, I think, at that time. And the idea was always kind of there, like, what would it be like if I ran a campaign? What would I do the same as what I've been used to? What would I do differently? Who would I pick as my players? But it was always just kind of like a distant thought. I didn't really try to put pen to paper and actually form a group and stuff like that. However, we have a mutual friend that for basically the entire time that I've played D&D and known this person, they always harassed me about how they've always wanted to play, and so they would harass me from time to time. And then a spot opened up in my Sunday game, and I didn't invite them.
The nerve.
Ultimately, they agreed because at the time their schedule was not nearly as concrete, and they didn't think they could commit to it. So ultimately, that was fine. But then more and more people that I knew were like, "Hey, yeah, like we're interested in this." It's like, "Do we know anyone?" And I was just kind of there in the conversation, and then, almost like this was over Discord that we were having this conversation, but it's almost like everyone just physically turned towards me. It's like, so I struck a deal. I told them I would run the game if they bought the module, because I wasn't going to do a homebrew one to start.
That makes a lot of sense.
They talked amongst themselves. There was 6 of them, so it ended up being like $8 a person, because I think most modules are like $50-$60.
Which, if you think about it, like that's real quick tangent. Like D&D is probably, in terms of cost, one of the most cost efficient games out there. If you wanted to just think of it in terms of monetary,
Mm-hmm.
Well, considering the amount of stuff you can do, and really the only book you actually need is the Player's Handbook. That is a $50 commitment for literal thousands of hours that you could have.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But sorry, carry on.
And so I had already had, obviously, my own copy of the Player's Handbook at the time. And at the time, I had acquired other versions of, like, the DMG and Monster Manual. Which, for me, I didn't have physical books. I used a lot of, like D&D Beyond stuff.
Yeah.
That, to me, is easiest, the best tool for me. Because the settings I play in are all online. I don't play, unfortunately, any in-person table games. So D&D Beyond is the best option.
Right.
And within a month and a half, I had the module, read through it, planned out how it was going to start, got my players together. We did a session 0, covered a couple things, and we started to play through Storm King's Thunder, which was the first module I ran. It is one of the highest rated modules, and a lot of information is in it, especially for $60.
Yeah.
300-400 page book.
Wow.
It's massive amount of information.
That's crazy. For a lot of it, for situations that may not ever come up, I imagine.
Yeah, there is, I think, a literal 100-page section that is just locations that you might need.
Wow. So something about that makes me curious. Back when they, in this Discord call where they all looked at you and they all, like, so to speak, what do you think it is about you that made every one of them immediately go, Asterix is the guy for this?
I think surface level answer would be that I've played the most.
Okay.
At that point, 2 years of playing almost every week. That's rough estimates, 104 weeks times 4 hours roughly. That's a lot of hours.
That is.
Put into a game. However, I'd like to feel like innately they thought that I was the right person for the job. And I think, like, post-discussion of that moment with a couple of the players who are remaining from that group, I think they say, like, they knew that I was going to be the best choice for them. I was like, okay, that's cool. I like to be told I'm doing a good job. I don't think anyone ever likes to be told they're doing a poor job, regardless of what I tell myself. But
yeah,
no, I feel like they had the faith in me at that time, so I felt like I had to deliver.
I think that makes sense.
As long as I was willing.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair.
And for as someone who's known you for like half my life, I have to agree with their judgment, like I think that makes you have a good mind for games as a whole and for like just and also for making sure people have fun.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Like you're very intuitive with not only like mechanics and rules and building, but also like how to provide a good experience to people. And so I feel like, I feel there had to have been some amount of innate like knowledge that like Asterix is the right person for this job.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so
it's always a good thing to hear.
Mm-hmm. Now, with the mantle being what sounds like rightfully passed to you, did you expect the amount of work and prep and time that taking that up and like taking on that expectation would take? And
did you go into it with advice from your previous DMs? Because you said you'd played for 2 years before DMing. So did you have like a starting point? Did people give you tips or pointers?
Yeah, definitely. I had asked the members of my other group, because one of my players in my other campaign has been playing tabletop role-playing games for over 20 years. So that's a lot of time. I think they've played every single iteration of D&D to this point. Not only several other different game modes and stuff like that. So they had a bit of insight. They gave me a rough starting point. I was like, okay. So the rough guideline of what a lot of people say is 30 to 60 minutes of prep time per hour of gameplay. And I would say for a module, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
For a homebrew campaign, it's doable with that. I was definitely not ready. I wouldn't say what was required of me, because I honestly think I put in more time than what you guys would feel like is required of me. And that comes down to I just fell in love with the idea of DMing and prepping, and I just have fun with it. So, no, I was in no way ready for what was going to be ahead of me.
But it's been a labor of love. Like,
yes.
I remember you mentioning to us a while ago. And now this is the other interesting thing with this being a re-record is since it's been about a little over 2 months since we recorded the last one, and you've had in that time more ability to flesh out the world, build things, establish not only the path that our characters are taking, but also the world in which the path is occurring. Some of your thoughts are going to, and your experiences, I think, are going to have changed within that period of time. So would you say that the amount of work and prep as you've been developing this homebrew world has gotten easier? or if not easier, more time efficient?
That's a very good question. Time efficient? Probably not. I'm probably not as effective with my. I would say I'm both efficient in some instances and not in the others. So I make use of, for instance, I commute an hour for work currently. So that is a lot of my time where I am going through. Either I'm trying to practice character voices while driving. So it's a lot of times I can kind of just talk to myself in different voices. I also get a lot of inspiration from various media, whether it be other D&D media out there, like other campaigns that I've watched, or like just people doing commentary on different aspects of the game, or even songs. I get a lot of character inspiration from songs.
I could see that. Yeah.
And right now, in my repertoire of characters, there are 3 larger NPCs that I have built their initial personality off of a song or a couple songs. That being said, you guys have only met one so far, so I am prepping further into the future, sometimes by days, weeks, or months, for what you guys will eventually run into. But then I also have just a lot of wasted time where I'm just like kind of thinking about ideas. I don't put it into paper necessarily.
I don't think that's wasted time at all.
Mm-hmm.
I find I double back on something. I'm reworking stuff, and that can sometimes put you in that cycle of just like it happens a lot to people when they're coming up with their initial campaign, like a homebrew campaign, because I have it actually started. I have a timeline. I have responsibilities I have to keep up to keep the game going. But in the initial stages, there's a lot of times where you'll keep reworking stuff. Like I spent months and almost a year working on this initial campaign, and of that usable time, it's probably only 2 months because I rewrote it so many times.
But I think calling that a waste is kind of like a fallacy. You know, like if you're writing a novel, for example, editing and rewriting and going over and changing things, that I think probably takes even more time than it takes to put the story down. But you wouldn't have excellent literature without that effort, right? Mm-hmm. So I think
that's true.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call that a waste. But I can imagine it would be it would be a little maybe daunting, especially if you haven't spent that much time essentially writing stories before.
Yeah, and that's something that I've always had a bit of an affinity for creating stories, but only in a very specific sense. I struggle when it comes to rules of literature and language, and so penciling stuff down, often you're going to see tons of mistakes and stuff like that. So a lot of it is more or less just free form of what I'm creating, and I go off of just ideas and thoughts and feelings when I'm creating these stories. And sometimes I intentionally leave blanks too, because I don't want to just like pencil everything down and be just so rigid that it can't change. So there's holes in backstories, there's holes in lore, because what I decide to come up with in the past might not fit what I want in the future, or I might just come up with a better idea or something. Like,
yeah,
we recently had a bit of that in our campaign, actually.
Oh, yeah?
I decided it was a late addition to the lore of the story, and I had to rewrite sections of my lore. Sections that you guys haven't come across, so it wouldn't have impacted anything you guys have done. Where I thought, what if I introduced characters that weren't the current PCs into the world?
Oh, right. The addition of characters from the previous campaign.
The first campaign that we played.
Yeah. I'm excited to see, I'm really excited to see how that goes.
So for you, while you're going through, while you're doing this, there's an enormous amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, and absolutely a labor of love, but also a passion. And so when that all culminates, what for you is the ideal outcome for a session with your players?
My ideal outcome is definitely like the prime objective is to make sure that everyone is having fun.
Right.
Hands down, that is my main goal, and I'll say that with a bit of a asterisk on it, being that I will always put my fun second to the rest of the parties.
Okay.
And whether or not that is a good thing to do is debatable. But the reasons I say that, you can kind of see that sometimes comes up with like combat encounters.
Yeah.
There might be stuff that I create that ultimately, like, I want you guys to win, but that means I lose. So there can be a bit of that. But even though, like, I will sometimes, like, I might not be enjoying it as much, but if there's moments where it's like you guys are really in the moment, like whatever it might be, I'm not saying this has potentially happened, but I've prepped myself for if these situations come up. Like, I want to make sure that the prime thing is that you guys are having fun.
Right. Well, we do. I think like you do a really good job of giving players a lot of agency.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And kind of like I feel like I haven't had a lot of experience with a lot of DMs, but I feel like you have one of the best kind of interpretations of yes and of folks that I've met, like, because you shut down shit that is going to be a problem in the sense of like maybe mechanically speaking, maybe
thematically,
like,
we don't know yet.
Yeah, stuff like that. You're good at shutting down stuff that literally cannot happen for us to have a good game. But beyond that, you're basically like one of my favorite things to digress a little bit is I have a magic item that you've given my character. And it is my favorite thing in the world, and I love it so much. And one of my favorite things to do with it is, because I never ever plan when I want to use it. I always try and just like go based on whatever's happening in the moment. But one of my favorite things is saying I reach into my coat pocket and look for blank, because you have this expression come over your face that is equal parts like it's like joy, but it's also like a little bit of confusion with just a little bit of, and then inevitably you have the expression of like, aha, come across your face. And then I live for that transition. I live for it. It's one of my favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of just in my mind, I was just kind of going back and thinking of some of the things that you've pulled out. And I think at this point you are more of a pantry than anything. Because we've had, I think, some jams. We've had an exotic butter.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
What was that?
Did just pull out
Gilmead butter. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, the Gilmead.
May I please have an inspiration?
No.
I forgot to use mine yesterday.
Oh, well. There's always a recap at the top of the next session.
True enough.
And then recently, you apparated, however you want to put it, a 16-inch artisanal baguette that was just freshly cooked with some herbs and chives and thyme and all this, and less used of an actual food source and more of, as we've called it, emotionally support baguette.
Exactly. Sometimes you need the emotional support baguette.
You really do.
The
emotional support baguette's important.
Mm-hmm.
There has been a pillow, I remember that, and then you also
a weapon,
a brick.
Yeah.
The pillow is also a weapon. To be fair,
that's true. It was immediately used to
smack a ranger
whap
in the
or
face.
bonk, however. Yeah.
Lovingly.
Always lovingly.
And I mean, you have the full capability within the mechanics I've set for that item to twice a day currently, and at next level 3 times because it's off your proficiency bonus.
Oh.
To Yeah, we had worded that, I believe. If not,
I just
that's how
forgot
it
about
works.
that.
To basically be pulling out health potions. If you have uses at the end of the day, you could be doing that. But the fact that you don't makes it all that much better for your character, because you are playing your character how you've designed them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
your
that's the
character
part
wouldn't
that-
do
No.
No.
I remember we talked about that like right at the start. Like I know, and this is an interesting thing. This kind of like, I don't think this is actually a.
And to be fair, anyone who's listening to this, yes, it is technically a magic item that exists in D&D, but I've more flavored it as a item that I have inspiration from Dimension 20's D&D series. For anyone who may have watched that.
There you go. I imagine there's probably a bit of crossover between this D&D podcast and other D&D podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you get into one.
It's a rabbit hole.
Oh,
Yeah.
joy. Just
Yeah.
a never-ending joy.
So, when you're doing all these things, we talk about emotional support, Baguette, and all these things, whether it's like there's all sorts of like emotionally taxing things that happen to characters throughout a campaign. But how do you keep your players in like good mental spaces when you're dealing with potentially like difficult themes or like just challenging scenarios?
It is not an easy feat. It is something that I am constantly thinking about and terrified if I ever jeopardize that safety. Because ultimately, like I said, my main objective is for the players, not the characters, to have a good time. The players. So whether that be starting off in your session 0 and going over guidelines, which I always recommend for anyone, not only to establish like rules of how the game is going to function, especially if you're changing rules, but to just get a gauge of what people are expecting out of it and where boundaries may be. And for us, that was very important because I knew off the top there was going to be a potential boundary that would come up, and needed to know that that was something I could walk through that door with you guys, hopefully guiding you carefully. But the world that I've created is not a happy world.
No.
There are happy moments and there's joy to be had. There are definitely moments where I think you all have kind of said in where it's like, holy crap, this is amazing. But there's those dark corners of the world. And the darkness can seep in, and I gotta make sure that the characters, that they experience what I've set ahead of them. But I want it so that you guys as players can leave the characters at the door and still be fine.
Yeah. And I think like you do the biggest thing that I think is important when it comes to that, which is you talk to your players. Anytime there's been anything that you've, suspected as being, this might be, I don't want to say an issue, but this might be a sensitive subject, you just bring it up to us and you talk to us about it. And as it is with most of life, I think open communication really is the biggest way to succeed in something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The other part that I don't know if every DM out there might have the same experience or the same luck or even benefit that I might, is I have a group of players that are 100% willing to call me out on bullshit when it's there. So,
True.
Can I swear in this?
Of
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would be in big trouble if we couldn't
I was like,
swear
oh, no.
on this.
That's the best thing with it
Because I
being
think
our
that's the
own.
first time in this recording, and I couldn't remember what the last one was like. Oh no.
You're good.
No, you're good.
Yeah, you guys are definitely willing and ready to call me out when need be, and it's up to me to be able to take that feedback that you guys give me, and realize where I may have gone wrong.
Yeah.
And that's why I try and stay in touch with all the players, saying, what do you think? Any recommendations? Any changes? Like, especially like around key moments. I see that potentially coming up within the ends of the next couple sessions. Because I think these are going to be definitely more role play heavy sessions. If it's combat, like, you know, the recommendations I might get is like, you made it too hard, you made it too easy.
Yeah.
Mechanics.
But that's the thing. Combat's a very like, it's by the numbers most of the time.
Yeah. You're typically not going to run into jeopardizing the safety of your players, not characters, during combat. During combat, I will destroy all of you.
Exactly. That's when the adversary mode turns on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's welcome though too, right? Because like the thing is I think for any story, right, you have to have peaks and valleys. If the entire story is, oh, everybody has a great time and, you know, there's no conflict and there's no fighting and there's nothing, you know, that's generally not what an adventuring party wants. And conversely, you know, it's also not fun when somebody's like, oh, you know, let's go do this. And then it's like, oh, everyone is acting as their players, where generally in our party, we have a lot of folks who are, you know, do just want to have a good time and like go along with things. And that's awesome. And that's great. But then for the sake of the story, like it's nice sometimes when there is like, you know, an, oh, well, perhaps there's a secret deal with a ranger to, you know, just add some more conversation and depth to those things. Right. And then you do have things where it's like, oh, you have to remember when there's a party of adventurers, there are multiple different relationships and multiple different things going on, and getting a chance to explore all of those and not always having them be, oh, everyone is a team and everything's great. I mean, that's wonderful, but it does take away some opportunity for some cool moments.
Exactly.
Like hitting folks with pillars, you know?
Yeah.
And especially when introducing those kind of like secret conversations, unless it's something that I believe is crucial to keep from the rest of the group, I will have those conversations in front of the other players, because you guys are fairly good at being like, this is what I know as a character and this is what I know as a player. And you guys sat with that information whelming, like not knowing when you should try and ask about it because there's no hint to ask about it.
Exactly. Like
I think at least 5 sessions before you guys finally dealt with it. And
yeah,
during that time, more and more piled on, and I got to the point where you guys just finished up the arc that I had for you guys. You saved a town, and I just like, I said to you guys as players, like, I don't know how you're gonna do this, but you gotta start dealing with stuff, or it's gonna come crashing down.
Yeah.
And thankfully you did. You sat down around a table in the ruins after a zombie attack.
Yeah. What better way to discuss the goings on of the day?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. So in terms of like with a campaign, it can be tough to say this or to answer this next sort of question. But when it comes to like the length, the progression, and the story, what's kind of your dream for a campaign? Like, and you can interpret this honestly any way you want. I guess how do you want to see it go? How do you want to see this campaign, the one that we're doing, or any campaign go in terms of, you know, let's call it, let's take all of that and condense it to narrative. How do you want the narrative to go?
Okay, I think for covering a couple, like my ideas for our current campaign is, I would like to see it span somewhere between 1 to 2 years. With our current rate of development, I think that's somewhere in that gap is when we would probably come to the conclusion of the campaign. Maybe, depending, it might just go past the 2-year mark. But I would like to end at level 20 with our characters.
Yeah.
Especially because I think you guys are really meshing well with your characters. The other part of that is, this is kind of a pipe dream when we last recorded, but I've kind of set more into it as a likely possibility after completing 15 sessions. I really don't want to create another world again. Not that it's not that I just don't want to go through that process again. But I want to keep a persistent world.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And just see it
For what
keep
you
growing.
guys don't know is there's actually a full world map. You guys have only ever seen the continent.
Oh wow.
Oh,
more.
I didn't even consider that.
There is other continents, but there's not a whole lot of movement between them, at least in this current time. But the idea of you guys starting and ending your journey with these characters, having their epilogue moments, however long that is for each character, depending on their outcome, depending on how long they can live, depending on what their character has done in their past. That is still yet to be seen. But maybe the next one might be on the other continents. Maybe it might be on the same continent 10, 20, 50, 100 years in the future. I don't know. But I want to keep this world. Unless you guys destroy it.
Hopefully we don't destroy it. That would be ideal, especially something you've gone and put so much work into. You know?
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a bit much.
Yeah, it would be. It would hurt a little bit. It'd be a great ending, but I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna need a bit more time before we start up the next one.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those things where you got to have a little bit of a chance to get to explore. Because I have a feeling, honestly, the longer it goes on, the more you're going to have more pieces that you want to play with over time, right? So that's yeah. I expect that by the end of this one, you'll just be like looking forward to the next.
And especially because the later you guys get in these characters, the more abilities that you guys get. I mean, you play a sorcerer, you can eventually teleport across the continent, the world. You can plane travel.
Yeah.
There's so many possibilities when you start getting up to those levels. And that makes the world that I've created, where you guys have really only explored 5% of currently. You guys can just look at a map and you're like, I'm going to try going there. Now, if you've never been there and you're teleporting, you might not end up there, but you'll get maybe close.
Yeah. I'm so excited. I just like thinking about all the different directions. It's one of those things where it's very gratifying that it only is a weekly, a mostly weekly thing. But it's sometimes I get so impatient. I'm like, what happens next?
Like you want to read ahead, but you can't.
I know.
It's crazy.
Be in my position where you know everything and you want to talk to people about it.
Oh. Yeah, because you've created all
but
these
I can't.
ideas. Yeah, you've just created all these ideas where it's like, well, fuck.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I have found a couple people online that I've grown some friendships with. One who may end up on this podcast. I don't remember where that was left, but...
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay,
definitely.
Cool. We will see them later. I will not name them, but we will see them later, and they'll know who they are, and I know who I am, and that's where we're left.
Perfect.
I'm glad
where
you
I
know who
can
you are.
sit down and talk to them about it, because especially them, they have a very similar approach to one of the earlier questions that we had about safety. That was their main. I think their main goal when they started, that was something they wanted to keep sacred. And they're just really cool.
Yeah.
So it's you have to keep some things under wraps to certain groups, but you do have at least a few people who you can let in on the story and kind of workshop those ideas with. And with that in mind, what are your hard no's for character creation? And have you ever had something go terribly, terribly wrong from what you anticipated or where you thought the story would go?
Okay, so more of what don't I allow, and have I ever had some narrative blunders, I guess?
Well, so what don't you allow? And even with those rules in place, when have things still gone completely off the rails?
Yeah, when even with restrictions, how have people managed to somehow either intentionally or not circumvent it?
Mm-hmm.
So for the hard nose, I I approach a couple things with caution. There's a couple things where if a player were to ask, can I play this? It becomes very much on the player to convince me of why I think they should. And it's not many things. There are a couple subclasses which can get a little dangerous mechanically, same as some races.
Just in terms of being a little bit too stacked?
Yeah, for instance, bugbears.
Mm-hmm.
They're hard to balance because they already have a natural reach that's farther than everyone else with any sort of weapon. So they have a 10-foot reach natively. And they also get a bonus sneak attack just
built in
without being a rogue. Yeah, just bonus sneak attack.
Hey.
It doesn't scale like a rogue's does, but if you're a rogue bugbear,
even if it doesn't, that's free bonus damage, And like in a game where like D&D, where it's like the numbers are there for a reason and they tend to be somewhat uniform for a reason, that reason being the overall balance and equality of like various different characters and classes. When you've suddenly got someone who can play as a character who can do all of these things, but also then it can become a problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It comes down to trying to maintain a level of balance and fun. For the most part, everything that Wizards of the Coast has put out for 5th edition, for the main books, I probably won't allow any of the Rick and Morty stuff to enter my world, just because that's just asking for trouble. The other one is I'm not a huge fan of the lucky feat. I think it just that's often one that a lot of DMs will kind of say, if can we not please?
Mm-hmm.
Just because it can actually slow down games. Just having that feat.
Yeah, and it's like that's kind of a thing that both the players and the DM should want to be on the same side of. Like you want to try to, with D&D, I think, like make sure that as much as possible your time is being spent in a way that is fun and hopefully narratively interesting, rather than just like rolling a bunch of extra numbers in case something might change.
Yeah. And also, I think, like, especially with the lucky feed, most times, like, I give you guys a lot of inspiration too.
Yeah.
Like, that is something that normally doesn't really come up. So I feel like I kind of get around that, and I kind of give you guys a mild version of it. But that's just more or less, that's a reward for participating, for contributing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I also allow you guys to do a lot of like homebrew. Two of the players actually created their own spells for their characters that are waiting to be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And like flavor wise, we've changed a couple things. Prime, your character has thematically went through a change for one of their main abilities, and I think at least it seems like you enjoy it.
Yeah, it makes, I think, a lot more sense than the original one did to me, in the use of it, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I got to agree with that.
Especially once you hit level 5, you'll see a lot more impact with it too.
Yeah, 5's going to be a big one for you, for sure. So, with characters in mind, and this is a question that I'm really fascinated to see if and how the answer has changed for you. From our previous recording. Not that I'm biased at all, but what would you say is the weirdest character that you've ever seen in any of your games as a player, as a DM? And you know what? Let's take it one step further. Let's say spectating.
Ooh, spectating. That opens up a lot of... I think for DMing and playing, I would have to still give my original answer and say that is your character, Kerbershard. Just there's so many quirks, both with natively what Kerbershard has, now with the addition of the coat, how you approach situations, your outlook from the character's perspective. You are just so alien to the world in such a good way. And it makes people stop and think when they interact with you. Like, because you just don't have the same approach that other people would have, and you're just like almost go in as a child but not at the same time. Like it's just so weird.
Well, that's a line that I like am really trying carefully to walk with Care Bouchard of. I want him to have a childlike sense of wonder, but he's not a child. And that's I think it's
I think you do it very well.
I appreciate that. It's kind of handy having a child in the party, because then it's like I can like kind of be like, okay, relative to the child, how would Care Bouchard react to this? Relative to the party, relative to the actual child, you know, it kind of it helps me anyways.
Yeah, as a spectator, I'm gonna have to give that to. There's a character that was recently introduced on Critical Role's newest series. They just, at the time of this recording, only the first episode has come out, where Matt Mercer actually gets the chance to play. And that's something that I've always wanted to see.
Right.
And he is playing this dwarven sorcerer that just, every time he speaks, just has me questioning decisions I've made as a player, as a DM, and just like also has me just laughing. Like he is, it's just amazing to see him in the player role when he doesn't have the world to literally support. And I just want to see where that character ends up by the time that they're finished their little series before they start their newest long form campaign.
I love it.
That's awesome. That's amazing. I kind of want to, I need to, I think, check out that character, because I feel like what could make Asterix question everything?
Oh, it's so good.
We may have to get you to send us like if there's like a particular moment or a clip that you can think of, like, because I'm curious too, but starting.
Yeah, I've got a moment that kind of starts that. It's currently not available yet on YouTube. It should be on Monday, so tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I'll send you something.
Sweet.
Excellent. And now, Asterix, are you ready for your favorite part of the podcast? Come on,
I tried to think of like. I kind of added to it. It's still going to be a shitty answer to this question.
I believe. And I'm ready. You do the countdown and explain to our listeners what's happening.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. So this is the part of the podcast where we put the DM on the spot for a little mini game we like to call Explain It in an Elevator. You've got 1 minute to explain D&D and your campaign to a stranger in an elevator. And go.
All right. So have you ever wanted to just have a great time with your friends and maybe throw some plastic objects around angrily? So this is D&D. My current campaign was created solely from the idea of a single song that I heard from TikTok. I listened to it and began crafting a situation, that a plot, a world, some characters, everything. It's a high fantasy with some modern elements, a lot of mystery, good and evil forces. We haven't seen the evil yet. And hopefully some mystery to keep my players guessing.
We haven't seen the evil yet. Dude, we just stabbed a necromancer's heart.
You still have 25 seconds left.
Oh, dang. That's it. That's all I got. There's bread that comes out of a pocket. I don't know what else you want.
Well, you know what? We'll call it there and say, you know what? Congratulations. You have definitely successfully explained your campaign to a stranger who has never heard of D&D.
Yeah.
I don't know if they understand it. I don't know if they think you're sane.
But you did it.
But you did.
Yeah, I accomplished. I read the assignment and I submitted it.
You
Exactly.
did great. That was beautiful.
Thank you for that. And so to circle into like the mechanical side of things for a moment. When you're DMing, right? And now again, I'm curious how this answer has changed, between previous recording and now. Do you have a specific level range that you enjoy DMing for, where the characters are powerful enough for X but not so powerful enough for Y?
I don't know if there's honestly been enough time for my answer to change on this one. I've only properly DM'd a party up to level 8. That was our first campaign.
Right.
And you guys are still only level 4 at this point. You gained a level since the last recording, though, so that's cool.
Yeah.
And my always thought is that somewhere between probably starting at 5 or 6 and then up to like 12 or 13, that is kind of the D&D sweet spot for 5th edition, at least. The reason behind that is you have a lot of options starting at level 5 and 6 to accomplish, to kind of get into that mid game. Like you're rolling with your characters, you got an idea of where you want them to go, and you've got some power behind it. Your martial classes, they've learned extra attack at this point, so they're able to do that kind of stuff. Spellcasters, for the full casters, you've got your 3rd level spells, which you start to get some juicy stuff coming from there. And then 12 to 13, kind of because anything past that point, you can start running into, I don't remember what the term is for it, but essentially you have so many options that you're just paralyzed by it, and you just can't make decisions fast enough, and that can start to slow down the game. And from a narrative standpoint, when you hit 5th or 6th level, you're no longer dealing with just random goblins and bandits and stuff like that, and then you start delving into like political messes, some lower to mid level magic stuff. You might start getting into some cult stuff, but then when you hit 13, beasts and kings and tyrants stop becoming an issue, and you got to start looking to which god you want to kill. Like that's that can become escalates. A problem too.
Yeah.
I started out looking for what god I was gonna kill.
Yeah, that was
that's why I incorporated one into my backstory.
Hey, there's something that you guys have caught the ire of.
Yeah, no kidding. Something.
Something that may or may not be in Modamir, or may or may not be our problem. Who knows?
Yeah. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Be interesting.
Oh, it will. It definitely will. And so for DMing and D&D as a whole, Prime, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. What is it about this medium that has captured your interest and that fulfills so much passion within you?
Part of that comes down to I've always liked creating stories, and I've always had a fairly wild imagination. It just never really left my head, was the big thing. But I encountered roadblocks or shortcomings early on in my life that prevented me from really exploring that, whether it be outside influence from maybe people not telling me I was good enough to do stuff like that, or my own self-doubt, or just no interest in following the rules of storytelling and stuff like that. But I always did have a love for it. I just didn't want to do it in the way that was available to me.
Yeah.
I always knew that D&D was a thing from a very young age, being very deeply ingrained in video games, and a lot of early video games are based off of tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah.
So I always knew that was there. When I was growing up, there was the whole it's devil worship thing that was definitely going around, and so I stayed away from it due to my own safety then.
Sure.
But it was always on my radar. It wasn't until I think early 2010s that I tried to get into it, and it took several years to just get off the ground with it. But it's just the idea of crafting a story either from a player or a DM perspective. There's just nothing that can compare to it. You can have, write your own adventure novels or open world sandbox games, but it all pales in comparison to tabletop role-playing games. The freedom that you have with them is just astounding.
Yeah.
You can literally do anything as long as the person who runs the games allows it, but that gives you so much freedom, and ultimately, in the DM side of it, to be able to see my players enjoying what I've brought them is just second to none. I'm a people pleaser by heart, so it just seeing people happy
about something you've made, especially, or at least facilitated. Yeah.
I can say this is my world to a certain extent, but it also really isn't at the same time. It's something that I have offered to you guys, and you're willing to experience it. But by experiencing it, it's no longer just mine, and that's scary, but also exciting at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Absolutely,
I love it. Getting to be on this side of it, it's very, very, it's very, very fun, and I love how fulfilled you sound from the DM side of it, and so when it comes to because the players, for better or for worse, the players are a huge part of a D&D campaign, so I'm gonna see, because we've of course talked about the questions we're gonna ask. I'm actually going to, I think, let's bundle these next two together, because I think that they kind of relate to each other, and it's want to know what your take is sort of on it as a whole concept. So for one, what are your thoughts on PvP, situations that it fits and don't fit within TTRPGs and D&D, and how does that impact table conflicts, disagreements between players, and how do you like to handle those things? And do you think that there's sort of let's say advice to aspiring DMs out there, because I think conflicts between players are one of the things that can't be sorted out with a rule book most of the time.
No, it is one of the greatest challenges to do it properly, and there's never really a right answer to it. But I'm going to start with the PvP side of it, because it kind of links into the other part. I believe that there's always room for it. If you were to shut it down entirely, you are limiting what can be told from a story perspective. Because just what Prime said earlier on, you need that kind of inner group conflict a little bit, and sometimes that conflict can boil up to throwing hands or attacking each other. But there needs to be it needs to kind of be right place, right time. If you have players who are just constantly out to get one another, it can be a very destructive environment for both the game, and it can eventually be very unhealthy for the group in the whole.
Right.
There's very few situations that, if the conflict or the PvP doesn't get resolved fairly quickly, that's when it can start to become detrimental to the experience in the whole. As far as table conflicts, disagreements between players, you always have to be watching for it. So that's why I think talking to your players outside of the game is very important. because that is maintaining the lifeblood of what's going on. It depends on kind of what the conflict is. A lot of times, if it's minor, I would say keep the game going. Reach out to them and say, I'd like to maybe just chat about a couple things afterwards. I would probably try and chat with the players individually before then trying to bring them together to resolve what is happening. But in some cases, you can't do that. Some cases, you've got to stop the game. You've got to deal with it then and there, or it's going to get worse and worse.
Have you had something like that happen? Like either as a player or as a DM?
Thankfully, no. I've never had to stop a game, I don't think. At most I've maybe done like minor corrections in game, just saying, hey, just keep this in mind. The group that we have now was not always what it was. But I don't think I've ever really had any problematic players or problematic groups. So I'm rather fortunate in that regard. But with reading up others' stories, there's entire subreddits devoted to this of just D&D horror stories. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, you have to be willing to, if it comes to this, remove players from the game entirely. I've had players step down from my games, but that was more because of they weren't able to commit to it, and it was ultimately their decision. So I've never had to remove anyone, thankfully. And for those players, I am incredibly thankful and impressed with their ability to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it was definitely starting to become a problem. But they were able to recognize it before I had to deal with it. So that to me paints them in a better light.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Definitely.
But you can't let things fester. You have to deal with it. And you have to be willing to do whatever needed. But you also have to be the mediator. You can't attack someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you very much need to be the level-headed link in that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Because there's so many ways those conversations can go poorly. I'd say more ways that it'll go poorly than it'll be resolved in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the tough thing, like, with the DM is you're kind of, like, not necessarily responsible, I guess, is the word, but, like, because, you are the god of the world and kind of have all the knowledge and facilitate, like, a lot of the interactions, I would imagine there probably does feel like some amount of responsibility, because if a situation is happening, like, presumably that's not the way you wanted that situation to go. If it's getting escalated. So I would imagine it kind of feels like this extra amount of pressure on you as well to make sure that you're not, that you're staying impartial and trying to, like, if possible, work it out for both parties, or if there's multiple parties, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and often, like, I don't see a way that this would ever be needed, but any sort of correction that you might have to do, it has to be on the player side and never on the character side. Even if the player is creating a problematic moment with their character, when you start to punish the character, that will often lead in it going worse than it will ever fix it. I don't think I've ever seen an instance of that solving the problem.
No.
Mm-hmm. Like if a character does something shitty, like punishing them in game instead of talking about them and saying, hey, this isn't actually like a really appropriate thing to do or like way to be. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think, it's very fortunate that we have the group that we have and that we have the DM that we have, because of course, it's no secret the three of us probably spend more than a fair share of allotted time trolling D&D, but well, not trolling, but like, trawling.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Trawling D&D boards and reading stories and such. And of course, I'm sure some of us read some and go, oh my God, thank goodness we don't have to worry about that. And I think a lot of it comes down to, and again, not to like put all this pressure on, but like I think a lot of it comes down to the DM because at the end of the day, like it's like the head of a company, right? Like you set the tone, you set the pace, you create the world, and yes, you are the type of DM that gives us a lot of freedom, but you're also the type of DM who would step in and rein something in from getting toxic, which I don't think necessarily can be said across the board of all DMs. And so I think that's very fortunate for us. And it leads us into our next segment.
Oh, I'm excited for this one.
The DM alignment quiz.
So why don't explain what we're doing here?
Okay, so much like flowers in the field, there are many a species of DM. Some of them evil. Some of them good, some of them chaotic, some of them neutral. I think you see where we're going here. So, earlier, Asterix, we provided you a list of statements. And now, you are going to let us know which statement or statements resonated with you, at which point we will let you know what that says about your DM style, at which point you will let us know if our heads are up our ass, at which point we will let you know that we got it from a website. But anyways, so, Asterix, give us your lines.
I feel like I'm taking like the D&D BuzzFeed quiz.
Yeah, I
know. And alignment is a funny thing because I am very much of the idea that you can kind of drift between alignments for a lot of things. But I will. This is also re-recorded, so I will keep my answers the same because I still stand by it. There are two answers that I kind of give, where I will pick. I will let you roll for it because I definitely want to see, if your character is going to decide to do something, regardless of how skilled they might be in that, I want to see how, kind of let fate decide on how well you're going to do that.
Yeah.
Especially because it could be goofy and I can influence on how well you're going to succeed, but give you a chance to do it.
Love it.
But I also kind of the statement where it says, let's try something new, that kind of resonates to me a bit because I like the flexibility in the game that I have, where trying something new can be something that I'm implementing, something you guys want to try and implement, but I'm always up for it. It may not get implemented, or might, and then has to be withdrawn, but I'm always open to those conversations.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And so that puts you, Asterix, the Swift, Mr. Swift, if you will, in the true neutral with a touch of chaotic good camp. And of course, this is re-recorded, so this will not be new information to you, Asterix, but for everyone else, the true neutral DM, denoted by the phrase, you can't just have it, but I'll let you roll for it. Neutral is a hard balance to strike. It's not perfection, as everyone's technique is personal. Perfect is what's right for you. But a neutral DM finds a path between permissive, strict, threat, and reward that usually appeals to everyone. The generalized approach draws from tips and tricks from lots of practice and playing multiple systems across a long gaming history. The neutral approach may give the appearance of being a little overdone, if not generic, and most DMs will ultimately fall into this category somewhere, but it needn't be a bad thing, as every DM will have quirks that give their campaigns a unique touch and may lean slightly in one direction or another, which leans right into Asterix's chaotic good, which is DMs that experiment and toy with the gaming system, perhaps even going so far as to produce their own, go off the books altogether, or even throw in seemingly unrelated games like chess or Dark Souls to change the pace. So long as everyone is enjoying themselves and the story is good, the rules can take a back seat. Chaotic good DM's freeform style may not be to everyone's taste, and if an experiment fails, it can make for a bad game, but it's a necessity to go back to basics and also flavor with new things. I don't like the direct from the website. I like to flavor with my own thing.
Yeah. Well, you're a little chaotic yourself.
Well, maybe.
I do have a question just because that's now the second time I've heard it. is the section in there that says like chess or Dark Souls from the website itself?
No, that's from me. It says
Okay.
it says chess or where is it? Chess or poker, but psh,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say because like if they listed that, I was like,
it would be too bang on, right?
yeah, it's just like
Yeah.
that's weird because I've actually tried running a Dark Souls one shot before.
That's amazing.
Ooh.
I feel
It is not easy.
No, I'd imagine not.
Am I correct though in that there are at least some things in our campaign that are Dark Souls inspired?
Yes. There would maybe be some fundamental lore that I might have derived similar to some of the lore from Dark Souls. Maybe a couple characters you could see parallels between.
Yeah, Zach reminds me of a Dark Souls like summon helper sometimes.
Yeah, I could see
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't mind me asking, since you're currently playing through it,
Solaire.
any Solaire?
He's our Solaire. He's always like he's there
Interesting.
when we need him, and he's generally bright, but like he also maybe might be losing his sanity. So, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like
Interesting.
he has a bright and sunny exterior and he seems very helpful, but there's probably a deep sadness and loss under there somewhere, I guess is how it kind of feels.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what's going to come first. You finishing Dark Souls or major NPC growth from Zach? And I want to revisit that answer.
Ooh, I love that. All right.
right.
We'll put it on the books. A recap, a revisit of this episode when Prime finishes the whole series or just one?
You just have to finish Dark Souls 1.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, are we halfway yet, Anne Orlando?
You
I think it depends on how much we want to tackle like some of the optional stuff. I think.
there's only really the DLC is fairly optional. You don't really. It does provide some growth on characters, and there's a area that you can access from Anne Orlando that is also entirely optional.
We're gonna do that area, just not yet. I did warn
Yeah.
Prime about that area, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, I don't think you guys. You don't have any Lord Souls yet.
Nope, not yet. So
No.
I think we're probably around halfway, but in terms of ground covered more than things accomplished. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll do a re-record.
Yeah.
And then give you our thoughts on that for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like that parallel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I
can
think
see
it's
it.
pretty good.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, one of the things we like to do on this podcast, and especially for our DM, is we've got a section for questions on the reverse. Asterix let us know ahead of time that he had a couple of questions that he wanted us to know, and this is where kind of the fortunate thing is that I don't actually remember exactly how we answered these previously.
Yeah.
So this is probably going to be essentially new for all of us. So why don't you hit us with your questions there, Asterix?
Yeah, so being a DM, when you have players, even just people wanting to play, you often have a couple questions that you want to see kind of feedback-wise what they would say, especially the first question I've got for you guys. So how do you take or react to a rule being given by a DM, possibly like overriding a core rule in the moment? And what happens if you heavily disagree with that ruling? Does that change your answer?
Do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, I don't really remember my original answer either, but I would suspect it hasn't changed because I think for me, it's one of those things where, yeah, you can disagree with the DM's ruling, sure. Absolutely. Like, internally, you can be annoyed, you can be upset, whatever. But at the end of the day, like, it's the DM ruling. And that's the whole point. You have somebody who's putting a game together for you, and the whole part of the game for you is that you don't know everything that's going to happen. So you kind of just have to hope that you have a great DM who's not just arbitrarily trying to stop you from having fun or trying to, you know, frustrate you. And you kind of have to look at the bigger picture and hope that it is, you know, because they're trying to stop you from ruining yourself or the party's fun or the campaign or the story, or just the fact that, you know, sometimes as players, you know, we want to see our characters be, you know, the best version of themselves or have all the best things. And that's awesome, but that's literally the DM's job to balance us. So, you know, it's like, of course, you can react however you want to a DM's ruling, but at the end of the day, you kind of just have to accept it. And there's really not much point in getting shitty over it, because it's not going to add anything to the game, and you kind of just have to hope that the reason they've made that ruling is so that you will continue having fun in the game, and so will everybody else. So yeah.
I overall, I fully agree with that answer. I think it's like, you know, we talked earlier about how, you know, players, like a DM is also a player. They're just playing a different game, but the game that they're playing is kind of the one that, you know, linches the whole thing together. It's really important. And so, you know, I would say, like, to take the question at face value, 99% of the time, yeah, if the DM says it, it's the word of law. You know, if it was a situation where, you know, I strongly disagreed with it, we talk about it. I think that's a big thing. It's like, it kind of circles back to our earlier question. It's like open communication, talking about stuff that is a problem or perceived as a problem by somebody or multiple people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then in talking about it, like, because I find that friction comes when you feel like you're being sandbagged, or like when you feel like you're being, you know, like strong-armed or whatever into something. Like, that's a shitty feeling for sure. And so I think that sometimes that feeling can cloud that, like, that kind of basic understanding of like, oh, well, this is probably for the good of the game. But then, yeah, that's we're talking about it. It's like, hey, you know, I feel like you're, you know, like, forcing me into this or doing this or trying to stop me from doing this. And then, you know, then the DM has the opportunity to go, well, no, it just, you know, it's not going to work you know, or whatever the reason may be.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel it's kind of like to me, it's the equivalent of this. It's like, you can't, you know, as somebody who's reading a story or even somebody who's interacting in a story, like, you can give your input and you can give your hopes and you can give your facts, but even if you're the lead actor in a production, you don't get to change the story, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes, sometimes if there's a great collaboration, or sometimes if it makes sense, your thoughts and your input might change it, but like, it's not your right to change it.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's one of those things where if there's something where it's like egregiously like, oh, like, I don't agree with that, I'm kind of just like, oh, well, that's stupid. And then just kind of move on, because at the end of the day, you got to know that the people you're playing with and your DM want you to have a good time, and they're not out to get you, even though it feels like that sometimes. And, you know, I'm sure that there are some DMs out there who sometimes want to be vindictive, and I'm sure that has to be dealt with differently. But in my experience, it's just kind of be annoyed if you have to be, but, you know, generally it's like one of those things where, like, don't even be annoyed at them. Like, be annoyed at the situation, but then just realize that it's probably for a reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said.
I like those answers. Yeah, I think I have to agree. It just comes down to communication. That's any problem in D&D. That's just how you solve it.
Yeah, and really in life, you know, a lot of problems.
There's a reason that people suggest having good communication skills is like key.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing is they always say that, but they never go into depth. It's like, oh yeah, have good communication skills, but then they never tell you to have good communication skills. Though you also have to develop empathy and ability to look critically at yourself. Like, there's a lot of things.
There's a
that
lot
go
involved
into
with communication.
But just aiming for it is a good start for sure.
So the second question I had for you guys, and I'm going to word this maybe a tad differently because I think I slightly remember the answer the last time. Have you ever had the desire to DM in the past, or have you DM'd in the past? And if so, what either stopped you from DMing, or what has stopped you from starting to DM? And do you have any plans in the future to DM?
So for me, I attempted to DM. So I got two answers. I attempted to DM a proper D&D 5e session or campaign or whatever. It was like it was a homebrew brain thing. It made it through session 1, and then it just never continued, as I'm sure a lot of people have experienced with D&D. And when I was a teenager, we played this game called Warhammer Quest, which was...
That's what it was called. I couldn't remember the last part.
Yeah. And it was basically D&D light. And my brother and my dad and I were into Warhammer, so it was something we picked up at one point or another. But anyways, I remember with that one time, we had a number of friends in our friend's basement, and we were all probably like 15, maybe 16, something like that. And
something like that.
I remember just spinning a story out of the back of my head in an encounter, and I don't know if it made sense, but everybody seemed to have fun, so there was that. But overall, I would say no. I've not had any true DMing experience, but having spent more time talking to you and talking to other DMs and just getting a greater understanding of kind of what the ecosystem of it is like, for me, I don't actually know if I would really want to DM a full campaign. I think the way my brain is, I'm not sure I could maintain and enjoy it over that span from that perspective. However, I do think I would have a blast DMing like a 1-shot or a 5-shot or something like that, like a limited kind of series thing. I think that would...
Short form.
Yeah, like I think the shorter form would work better for me if I were to do that. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, for me, I love the idea of DMing a campaign. It sounds so fun. It sounds so good. For me, the only reason that I haven't is I really hadn't played any D&D at all since high school, and I learned very quickly that we did not actually play D&D in high school. We just had books, D&D books, and made characters and told stories about them. And,
I mean,
hey, that is D&D still.
That's 80%
that
D&D.
It is 80% D&D,
Yeah.
but we didn't even have a die. So, well, no, we had a 6-sided, but we would make up the rules, right? So, so...
Go for it.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun, and I loved that, and I wanted to do that again. But I knew that to be a good DM, and to be like a proper DM, I needed to get some experience as a player. And yeah, so that's kind of where I am in my D&D journey now. I'm finally at a point in my life where I have time that I can be a part of a campaign, and that feels really, really good. And yeah, hopefully in a couple of years, I'll feel comfortable to DM one. I think that it's the same with Arcad. I would probably be a lot more comfortable doing like short forms. But yeah, like the idea of being a player long-term in a campaign seems really cozy, but the idea of being a DM long-term in a campaign sounds like I'm just setting myself up for failure, because I only get like X amount of free time, like in X amount of bubbles per year that is only set to decrease as I age. So
exactly.
Yeah. So kind of just
takes a lot of time.
Yeah. But I think that through playing, I've already gained such like an understanding and such a knowledge of the rules. And then, through this podcast series, I hope to just continue to get to talk to a lot of really great DMs and bring that knowledge into my first campaign, which will be really exciting.
Yeah.
Cool. And with the idea of talking about creating your own world or game, or taking existing one and just butchering it, do you feel like DMs who homebrew or add alternate rules could go too far with their rules and may even ruin the experience, even though they're trying to provide their players with just more options, opportunities, and freedoms?
Can I jump in really quick
Please.
first? No. Absolutely not. So here's my thought on it, right? And so of course this is going to be the most controversial take, and I get it, because you know what, they're traditionalists and they're loyalists, and I get it, and I see you and I appreciate you. And for you, yes, absolutely, fuck the homebrew DMs, whatever, get your bumper sticker. For me, I don't care about any of that. I care about spending time with my friends and having an incredible time, making them laugh, getting some laughs myself, maybe even some tears, like telling a good story and having a good adventure. And so for me, homebrew is like the equivalent of getting to use all the words, like when you're writing a story. For me, rules are wonderful and they're perfect for so many things, and they give so many wonderful things, more like life in some ways. Like even if we're thinking of fighting games, right? Like there's so much you can do in a Smash Bros game. There's items, there's so many things, and that just makes it accessible to everyone. And then there's competitive play, and there are restrictions on that, and that's completely understandable. And for those who want the competitive play, those restrictions are absolutely necessary, because if those restrictions aren't there, they're not playing the game they want to play. But I'm not out here playing competitive D&D. If I were, I would absolutely say, you know what, a homebrew campaign, maybe that's not for me. But for me, I want every possible wacky thing that could happen to be able to happen if it works within the laws of the world. And I feel like homebrew just gives you a whole 7 new boxes of toys that is really, really fun. So, as with anything, I'm sure that, the Dark Triad DM running their homebrew is going to ruin the game. But so is somebody who's so adherent to rules that they don't care about their players having fun either. So, no. You know what? Add the rules. And if they go too, it's one of those things where, could they go too far for me? Yes. Could they go too far within the medium of D&D? No, because I think that's the whole point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really have a whole lot to add to that. I would say, that pretty much sums up my feelings on it too. I guess, if I were to add anything, it would just be that I agree, obviously, but I think that to take it one step further, I love just imagining things, and coming up with ideas for things. And while I don't mind taking those ideas and then kind of contorting them and reshaping them so that they fit within the rules, if they don't have to, then that's even more freeing, and that feels so good. So I don't really think homebrew can be done too much. And I would, the only thing I would add is that if somehow it is, then I think that's a DM issue rather than an issue with freedom. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even just to add on to that a little bit more, it's with homebrew and with the opportunity to add things to a story that it provides, generally you expect that a DM is going to be working from the framework of D&D and probably a particular D&D edition, right? That's generally something discussed. I think perhaps if it goes so far away from that, it doesn't resemble D&D. That just becomes a naming issue. At that point, it's all right, you're not playing homebrew D&D, you're playing your own thing. And that's never bad either.
Yeah.
So,
but call it what it is.
Call it what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it all comes back to what we keep talking about. It's communication. If you walk into a game workshop and you're I'm running this D&D set, we're doing traditional 5e rules, and then you go wild with homebrew, that's a problem. But if you say, hey, we're going wild, well, then we're going wild.
Exactly.
Wild magic sorcerer.
Always.
I just say I thought of that question particularly because both of your characters have, on varying different levels, splashes of homebrew in them, whether it be reskinned abilities or followers or a entirely homebrewed race.
Mm-hmm.
You guys definitely don't have the most homebrewed of all the characters in our game, but you guys are up there.
We got some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that that's another thing that kind of just highlights that as well. We do have a lot of homebrew in our campaign and we have a lot of homebrew in our characters, but I think even with all of that, I don't feel super OP, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's still obviously room for failure, and there's still room for moments, and there's still a lot of things that the DM can do that balance it all out. So yeah.
Exactly. And it's been so fun getting to just be the characters we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you guys like your character so much. Even all of you. I don't think there's a single one of the players that doesn't like playing their character.
That's
which
good.
Wasn't the case, I felt, with our first campaign.
Yeah, I know, like, I think partially because it was like trying to fit a role rather than actually creating a character I was passionate about. I know, like, I was definitely not as invested in that previous campaign as this one. And I think even one step further from there, like, the fact that it was, I don't know, maybe it's just like my silly brain, but I'm like, you know what? The fact that it's written in a book somewhere makes me less interested than if it's coming fully out of my DM's brain, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and like that is the downside of modules.
Yeah. I think it was a great place to start. Learned a lot.
Yes.
But
yeah, I learned shortcomings and how to avoid them.
Yeah.
I must say, like, one of the things that I still find the most interesting about that campaign was I really did end up falling in love with my character. I made him to fit a role, but like I feel what I made of him was
you did a lot.
The personality. Like I feel like he had a lot of personality, and I think a lot of really cool RP moments. But what like stands out to me about that campaign was I actually think that my favorite part of my character from that campaign was something from a session I missed, like, which I think speaks a lot to you as a DM, because you created this wonderful situation where our cat's character and my character had gone off on this like kind of side quest for the one that we couldn't make, and you'd created this whole wonderful, hilarious narrative that we were able to just kind of grab onto and run with. But it was harder, like, not being, I think that's when I started to fall in love with the character, though. And so that's what's really interesting is how it felt like a little more hollow, I think, in that one, because it took a while for me to start to love my character. And, you know, and the things that kind of lent to him were things that were out of campaign, which was really interesting. But I think it just really highlights how throughout this campaign, like even when there's ridiculousness going on, it's like it's still always an opportunity to, you know, continue to develop like a character that I really love and I'm really invested in. And even when it's not like active, you know what I mean? Like even if I'm not actively role playing at the moment, the way that this campaign is, it feels like everything develops from the whole party. Whereas I feel our further campaign, probably because we were more detached from the characters and because you, I think, were maybe a little bit more detached from the campaign itself than this one, because your whole like heart is in it. I think it just felt a little easier to treat them as kind of, oh yeah, they're characters I play every couple weeks. Whereas now it's like, well, no, that's Morig. And like, I have this whole, like I see her, you know, she's 3D, whereas M was 2D, and I loved M, but like Morig is so much more. Yeah.
I feel that. Yeah. Like Kerbushard is like an actual entity that, as far as I'm concerned, exists. Hetar at best was a sketch on paper. You know, like there wasn't enough there.
Yeah, they're very, very surface level in some regards, and that's why like I liked the idea of playing and testing and, you know, getting able to get my feet wet with DMing. Interesting that you brought up the fact that the part in Bryn Shander that we had the two different groups doing two different things. Funny enough, both of those little adventures ended up influencing our current campaign.
Ooh.
M,
amazing.
Obviously, somehow found himself in our current world, which is not part of Faerun. It is an entirely different world. It's not one of the other continents. I will say that now. And the Stein that was fashioned out of the Manticore body parts that you guys had retrieved. And what you might not know or remember is what the other players did is they trekked up a mountain, found a Yeti that had unfortunately taken the life of a wandering adventurer. And that wandering adventurer was... their soul was so crushed that their life was ended that they rose from the dead to seek vengeance as a revenant.
Well then.
Well then.
Interesting.
I was going to say, it's like, that's why the other ones, particularly our paladin and our ranger, were much more keen when that came into play because they had to deal with it already before.
Yeah.
Several months before.
That's so funny.
Yeah. That was one of the things. It was I liked the idea of the Revenant as a creature. Because whether you interact with them as being, in the case of the campaign 1, it was a focus on the Yeti was the focus, and they were more or less the third party in this duel. And they had to make a decision, what are they going to fight? Do they fight the Revenant? Do they fight the Yeti? They sided with the Revenant. The Yeti was slain, and the Revenant peacefully passed away.
Or did he?
Whereas with our campaign, the trigger is a little more blurred with that one.
Yeah.
And there's been some talk about it, and I don't even know how well that would fix the problem.
Damn.
Yeah. It's going to be so interesting just to see. It circles back to what we were saying earlier. You know, there's so many things we want to see the payoff for. It's like, that's why every week is so exciting, because it's like we get to take another little bite. You cannot binge D&D no matter how hard you try. You have to have it bite by bite by bite, and each one is so satisfying.
Well, AsterixtheSwift, thank you for featuring on not only today's episode, but also for helping create the lore of the lost episodes before the first podcast even releases. That must be a record.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
It was just as fun as the first time.
Yeah.
And like I said, I always enjoy talking about D&D, whether it's my campaign, gushing about stuff I watch, or just spitballing ideas with people.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
It's always a blast. And I think I'm excited to see kind of just what folks think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Same. I can you have comments on a podcast? Like,
I'm
is that
sure.
something that exists on?
Well, I'm sure if we put it on the website, and then, we'll figure it out. People will find it. Trust, if people want to tell you something, they'll find a way.
That's fair.
But yeah, thank you all for listening. Asterix, thank you for being here. Arcad,
it was
beautiful
my pleasure.
as usual.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
We'll
it was
see
a
you all
blast.
next time. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Romantic Dinner with the DM. We are so excited to have you on our journey as we learn about the worlds and stories created by dungeon masters and game masters in this wonderful, wonderful medium of TTRPGs.
We've got new episodes coming out weekly, and if you're jonesing for new content in between, check out our YouTube.
Link below.
And follow us on twitch.tv/Arcad and Prime.
We'll see you next week and really hope that you enjoyed the episode. Bye.